So this is episode 3 of my How to Fix series. As the title says, we are going to go with the Los Angeles Lakers, and it's crazy. A lot of things can change in the span of, 6 months? Not even 6 months. I mean, before LeBron's injury in February, Lakers were the favorites to at least come out of the West. LeBron was an MVP candidate, or was the front runner for the MVP. But then Anthony Davis had his injury. LeBron had his injury. Anthony Davis got re-injured again in the playoffs. And they got knocked out in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs to the Phoenix Suns. Only got the 7th seed at a 42-30 record. And their current payroll is $122 million, which is just over the salary cap, but under the luxury tax. And they have seven players currently on their roster, so they have a lot of free agents. And, these are just some reports of what the Lakers might want to do. Shams from The Athletic said the Lakers are trying to pursue a third stellar player who provides both shot creating and playmaking next to LeBron and AD. And, from Jeanie Buss and from Sam Amick, I think is how you pronounce his name, from The Athletic, there's reports from Jeanie Buss, owner Jeanie Buss Down, that the Lakers believe that people within the Lakers organization believe their championship window is shorter or is going to shut quicker than originally anticipated. So, not a lot of time left. And with this video, I want to obviously not take as much time because I thought it was going to be shorter last time, and we went almost 40 minutes. So, let's get right into things. The Lakers hold the 22nd pick in the NBA draft. Excuse me. So they hold the 22nd pick in the NBA draft. I'm going to go over some prospects. Now, if I've talked about prospects in other videos, I probably won't, break them down as much. I'll kind of just give a general gist again of who they are if you forget or you're kind of new watching this. So, these are two targets. I'll talk about first who I don't believe will be available at 22, but if they are there, that'll be cool. The first option is Corey Kispert. Now, I wasn't a huge fan for him for the Warriors at 14, but see the difference is, or not 14, at 7. But see the difference between 7 and 22 is obviously a lot. And so, if you get a guy who is inarguably the best shooter in the country, shot 44% on 6.5 attempts, can kind of do everything else at an okay enough level, He's a smart guy. He knows when to cut. He can play off ball. He can put the ball on the ground if he needs to. He knows how to make the proper pass. He's not going to kill you on any end, but his shooting will allow him to always stay on the court, and he's not going to be a complete liability on other ends. And then Sharife Cooper, dude has amazing quick speed. He is arguably the best passer in this draft. I mean, despite his lack of shooting ability, he did shoot almost 82% from the line at college, so on 8.5 attempts per game, mind you, which is a very high free throw rate. So he obviously has at least somewhat of the foundation to improve on at the next level, and while he does have a high turnover rate, he averaged over 4 a game. I think that's just due to the amount of the sheer volume and usage he had at Auburn. Once he's a secondary guy, things should be a lot better. And if the Lakers are able to re-sign Alex Caruso to pair next to him, I think that could be an excellent backcourt tandem because Caruso can make up for Sharife Cooper's liabilities on the defensive end. Okay, now let's get into some prospects who I think are going to be more realistically available at 22 for the Lakers. Miles McBride, I talked about it in my Sixers video. Kyle Lowry-esque player. I mean, the dude is a great passer, defender. He's a stocky build. Even though he's 6'2", he weighs 200 pounds, and he almost has a 6'9" wingspan. So, even though his size appears to be a bit smaller, or his height seems to be a bit deceptive, he could probably guard 1 to 3 at the NBA level without much trouble. He's a pesky one-on-one defender. He is a good enough three-point shooter. Shot 41% on 4 attempts. Has a great assist-to-turnover ratio, so he can both pass the ball, but he's not going to give the ball up a lot, which is something I value a lot, especially for guards. Also, to add on to his defense, I mean, dude averaged more steals. He averaged more steals than fouls per game last season at West Virginia, so he obviously is a very disciplined defender as well, and a lot of the shortcomings in terms of, his not being the greatest one-on-one player. It's not going to matter when you have a guy like LeBron James on your team. Next player, Bones Hyland, another guy I talked about in my Sixers how-to video. Guy's a prolific scorer and shot creator who can be efficient even with high volume. Elite three-point shooter, 37% from behind the arc on almost 8 attempts per game. And he went 15 of 18 in the 30-plus feet drill at the Combine. Excellent ball handler. His facilitating is not where you want to be, but if you have a guy like LeBron, I feel like, he won't have to be the facilitator. He could be more of just an off-ball shot creator. And the other problem with Bones Hyland, which I don't like him as much as Miles McBride, especially for this Lakers team, just needs to put on a bit more weight. I mean, he's 165 pounds right now, but at least he has the wingspan at 6'9" to at least have some ability on the defensive end. And he averaged almost 2 steals a game at VCU last season, so he has good anticipation, just needs to put on a bit more weight. If he's a guy available at 22, I think this is a guy who could be a great shot creator for this Lakers team off the bench, which needed shot creation outside of LeBron James last year. The next prospect is Trey Murphy out of Virginia. He is a prospect I haven't talked about I haven't mentioned that much in my previous videos, but he's an elite three-point shooter, shot 43% on 5 attempts. He has good size. He's 6'9", 206 pounds with almost a 7-foot wingspan. He shot almost 93% from the line as a junior. He mostly operates in the catch and shoot, and the one flaw with him is that he can't really put the ball on the floor, so if he's not hitting his shots, he really isn't bringing much offensively. And on the defensive end, even though he has a big build and he is athletic to a degree, he still really hasn't come to his own in terms of defender, so he will need to improve on that. But he is an elite shooter. He shot 50, 40, 90. He isn't going to do too much on the floor, but he's also very limited. If the Lakers just want a guy who can be a catch and shoot off LeBron James, I think Trey Murphy would be a great option. And yeah, I mean, I don't like his ceiling as much as some of the other prospects here, but if you want a low floor kind of a guy who will be able to produce offensively day one, Trey Murphy's a solid option. Up next is Tre Mann out of Florida. He is another player I mentioned previously in my Sixers video. He is another combo guard who's an excellent shot creator and elite three-point shooter. He shot 40% from 3 on just under 5 attempts per game last season. He's a shifty guard with a killer crossover, and he's overall comfortable with the ball in his hands. Now, the downside to Tre Mann is that, like Bones Hyland, he struggles to make the right play. He either passes it when he doesn't need to, or he just makes the wrong pass. He had a 1.22 assist-to-turnover ratio, which it's not as bad as Bones Hyland, which was negative, but it's still not good, especially for the NBA level. And then on the defensive side of the ball, he easily gets beat. He gets beat easily. He's already at a disadvantage physically because he's more of a shorter guard. And, you're really going to draft Tre Mann for his offensive ability, not his defensive ability. But overall, elite shot creator, can score in a multitude of ways. Good, can create off the bounce. He doesn't, he can create the ball. He can create with the ball in his hands. And like I said, if you want someone who can just provide instant offense off the bench, if you don't want to re-sign Dennis Schroeder, Tre Mann would also be a solid option. Now, Cam Johnson out of LSU is the other prospect. If I can describe this guy in one word, he's a certified bucket. I know that was 3 words, but just take the bucket part. This guy can score at all parts of the area. He is not afraid to take any shot. He's a great finisher at the rim. He's got a turnaround jumper. He can operate in the pick and roll. He can attack the cup. He can shoot off the dribble. Now, the problem with Cam Thomas is that he's always looking to score. He isn't thinking what is the best play on the floor. It's more of how am I going to score here, which is a good mentality to have, but if you're playing alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis and you're missing, it isn't always the best option, and he does need to work a bit as a three-point shooter. He shot 32.5% on 7 attempts, which kind of also goes back to what I said earlier, is that he sometimes just takes whatever shot, even if it's not the most efficient. But I will say, like Sharife Cooper, the potential is there for him to become a better shooter. Shot 88% from behind the line, so he has that going for him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, he gets targeted easily. He doesn't have the proper discipline, and he kind of gets blown by a lot, even though has a great build, standing at 6'4", 210 pounds. It's kind of like his discipline and his defensive instincts aren't where they need to be. But overall, if you want a guy who can just score, and Cam Thomas has a lot of potential. I mean, if he can, kind of work on his shot selection, work on his defensive side, this guy could be an elite two-way player because he already has the ability to score basically from everywhere in the court. And as a freshman, he led the SEC in scoring at 23 points per game and had 2 games where he scored under 18 points the entire year. So, dude's got a deep bag. He can score from anywhere. He just needs to work on his shot selection and defensive instincts on the defensive side of the ball. Now, if I had to rank these prospects for the Lakers, I like Miles McBride. I mean, as much as the ceiling of like Sharif Cooper or Cam Thomas really entices me as going forward, the Lakers have to win now, and they need to do something that they can't really, be waiting on Cam Thomas to realize, hey, I shouldn't be taking a contested mid-range or a contested three-point shot when I'm not great at it. They need someone who kind of knows his role, can work from day one, can be a playmaker, can also serve as a shot creator, as a good defender, and especially if Alex Caruso walks, Miles McBride can fit in right away. So I think a lot of these guys are all good options, but if I had to pick one, I think Miles McBride's a solid option. Bones Highland also in the same vein. And if Corey Kispert's somehow available, which I don't think he will be, I like him too for this team. So those were the prospects. Now let's go into trades. If you've been on Twitter or social media within the past month, you've probably seen a bunch of players the Lakers are probably going to target in trades. I mean, that's just kind of always how it happens. So I'm going to break down these trades into like categories based on like how likely they are to happen or what do I think of them. So first thing off the bat, Russell Westbrook makes absolutely zero sense for this team. Russell Westbrook, I think he was very good last year. I think he honestly was one of, if you just take into account the second half of the season, Russell Westbrook was one of the best players in the second half of the season. I mean, dude averaged, 30, 10, and 10? I don't know off the top of my head, but dude was killing it, and him getting back to his 2017 form had a correct correlation with the Wizards being such a hot team in the second half of the season. But for Anthony Davis and LeBron James, Russell Westbrook is not the fit they need at all. They need a point guard who can shoot, facilitate, won't mind being the maybe third option unless LeBron wants to do that, which I kind of don't see. They just need a point guard who can play off the ball more, which we obviously know Russell Westbrook isn't a great off-ball player, who knows what shots he takes and kind of knows his role a bit more. I just think Russell Westbrook for the Lakers would be a horrible fit. I know the Cali connection's there. I know, oh my God, Russell Westbrook, he's such an amazing player. Trust me, the fit makes absolutely zero sense. The Lakers lacked perimeter shooting, and Russell Westbrook would just make that problem worse, especially given who they'd have to give up to acquire Russell Westbrook in a trade. So, absolutely makes zero sense. I mean, I think the Lakers have the assets to get it done, especially if the whole Bradley Beal situation develops, doesn't go towards the Wizards' way. I could see Russell Westbrook becoming available, and the Lakers would obviously be the front runners to get him, or one of the front runners, but fit makes absolutely zero sense. They're better targets the Lakers could go after. Next, these are trades that have absolutely zero chance of happening. No chance the Lakers are getting Bradley Beal. I'm sorry. KCP, Kyle Kuzma, Schroeder, and this year's pick's not doing it. They have no picks because of the Anthony Davis trade, so you can't even risk your future because all your future is basically in New Orleans' hands. So I don't think Beal's going to get traded, in this offseason. I think it's very unlikely. I've said that before, and the teams that the Lakers would have to go up against in terms of trade packages makes absolutely zero sense. Okay, next are trades that are not 100% out of the realm of possibility, which means I think there's a chance it could happen. I'm not saying it will, but I think there's a chance. And I'm going to start with Damian Lillard. And I know what you guys are saying. Ryan, how the hell is Bradley Beal not going to happen, but Damian Lillard is? Well, it's a bit different. One, I think Damian Lillard's more likely to get traded than Bradley Beal this offseason, so there's that in account. Two, if Damian Lillard does request a trade, I would assume he has full control over who he wants to go to. I wouldn't, it's not going to be like, oh, Damian Lillard requests a trade, guess what, you're going to the Orlando Magic. No. He's probably going to list teams, and I assume one of those teams is going to be the LA Lakers. That's just how it is. I mean, especially given how he's friendly with LeBron and AD. You know, he was in Space Jam 2 with them, so he has that relationship. If push came to shove and, you know, he requests a trade, the Lakers are probably going to be on there. And when you're one of three teams that you could possibly go to, it's a chance of it happening. You know, that's just how it is. Do I think they have the best package for Damian Lillard? No, but it's still out there, and I still think in some weird alternate universe, I could see it potentially happening. So next trade is Buddy Hield. And now I've seen a couple versions of this Buddy Hield trade. I've seen Kuzma and Montrezl Harrell if he picks up his player option. I've seen Kuzma, KCP in the pick. I've seen Kuzma and KCP. I've seen Kuzma, KCP, and Alonzo McKinney. Whatever. There's a lot of variations of this trade. Kuzma's the main centerpiece I've seen because, well, one, I think they just want to get rid of Kyle Kuzma, and Kuzma playing with Luke Walton, who was the head coach when Kuzma was a rookie. I think it was only his rookie year. I forget, though. But, you know, Kuzma, the connection between Luke Walton and Kyle Kuzma's there. Obviously, people believe that if Kyle Kuzma got a fresh start, he could potentially get some of the promise he had back in the 2017 campaign. I mean, it's a good fit for both teams, at least for Kuzma and Buddy Hield. For Buddy Hield, I mean, he's talked about his lack of desire to play with Luke Walton. He's felt like he hasn't fit in the proper system. You know, the Lakers, if he goes to the Lakers, he'll have one of the best playmakers in NBA history next to him and one of the most talented big men in NBA history next to him. So, the fit's there. I mean, he wouldn't have to worry about getting the attention he does in Sacramento. He would get a lot of open shots, and he would probably have a good green light to shoot the threes just because of how efficient he is. He's one of the best three-point shooters in the league, and when I was talking about him in my Sixers video, I said, you know, I'm not a big fan of him just because of his contract. Well, if you're the Lakers, you don't really have any other alternatives, and you don't have a Seth Curry kind of a guy who basically gives you the same production on cheaper value. The Lakers simply just don't have that on the roster right now. And then for Kyle Kuzma, he gets to go to Sacramento. Kind of no one has to worry about it. Like, he doesn't have any media pressure. He doesn't have to worry about Lakers fans hounding on him. He gets to work with Luke Walton again, which maybe might spark something in him, and, you know, he'll be able to go with De'Aaron Fox, who I think is one of the most underrated players in the league. Now, in terms of the other assets, I mean, if Montrezl Harrell comes in, he could easily be a Richaun Holmes replacement if they don't re-sign him. If KCP comes in, I assume they'll probably just flip him for another pick next year, so it kind of makes sense for both teams. I could see this realistically happening because the Buddy Hield market's so weird right now, and I assume teams who are kind of interested in him want something bigger, so they might just have to settle for Buddy Hield. Another trade I've seen is Miles Turner. I haven't seen like a direct link, but I've seen a lot of rumors saying Turner might be a trade possibility. I talked about him in my Warriors video. You know, the Pacers are kind of in this weird limbo state. They just hired Rick Carlisle. They kind of want to evaluate the roster. The main glaring weakness right now is the Sabonis and Miles Turner problem. Turner has the more value. I could easily see him getting flipped for probably the 22nd pick. Kuzma, KCP, and maybe something else. I know that's probably going to be the trade package for a lot of these mock trades, but, you know, the Lakers do need a center, given the fact that Anthony Davis doesn't want to play center, and that's a whole different conversation, but he would be a great fit alongside Anthony Davis. He can spread the floor. He doesn't have to clog the paint, and I mean, defensively, he's one of the best defenders in the NBA, so the fit makes sense. Now, would I take that over the Warriors package? No, but I don't think the Lakers necessarily need to make the trade either because Anthony Davis himself is a capable center. He just never wants to play it. So next package I saw was Kevin Love and the Houston's 2022 second-round pick for Kuzma and KCP. I mean, Kevin Love kind of makes sense for this team, but my issue with Kevin Love is that he's never available. Like I said, best ability is availability. Kevin Love's never really available. I know the LeBron and Kevin Love connections there from back in their Cleveland days, and if Kevin Love were to come over, I think that is a good fit because defensively he doesn't have to worry about defensive responsibilities as Anthony Davis is on their roster. Plus, he provides floor spacing for LeBron and AD, which is always good. And then in terms for the Cavs, Kyle Kuzma would be an interesting option, especially next to Darius Garland and whoever they pick up with their pick in this year's draft. And like I said, for the Kings, KCP would probably just be flipped for another pick in the future. But the fit does make sense, but I feel like Buddy Hield and Miles Turner are just better alternatives because A, they're younger, and B, they just play more. And finally, the last trade is Landry Shamet of the Brooklyn Nets. Like Buddy Hield, I feel like this makes a perfect fit for the LA Lakers. Shamet's obviously not as great as a three-point shooter as Buddy Hield is, but he's still serviceable in his own right, and obviously the Nets don't have any first-round picks until like 2027, I assume. So the Lakers do have the 22nd pick, which they can offer to the Brooklyn Nets, give them some youth. I assume they probably might have to include Kyle Kuzma to make the salaries work. I don't know if Landry Shamet's contract offhand, but given the Lakers cap situation, I'd assume they have to include either him or KCP, but regardless, I think that's a good fit as well, especially if you can't get Buddy Hield. He's a nice alternative to him, and I assume he's probably less costly than Buddy Hield as well. And this is just an overall report I've heard in terms of trade cycle and frenzy. The Lakers have offered KCP and or Kuzma to nearly every NBA team, and given the fact that they haven't been traded yet, is kind of a cause for concern for Lakers fans that if they've essentially traded them to almost every team and they haven't gotten at least the offers they're looking for, the likelihood of one of those two players being traded is still kind of small, but there's still a lot of offseason left. So now on to free agency. Like I said before, the Lakers have a lot of free agents. They have 7 players currently on their roster, which means they have more free agents than they do players. Or they have more free agents than they do actual players on their roster. So the free agents are Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, who is under a player option, but reports are saying it's basically 50-50 on whether or not he'll accept it. As of now, I'll just say he's a free agent but things could obviously change. Wesley Matthews, Alex Caruso, Jared Dudley, Markieff Morris, Talen Horton-Tucker, Andre Drummond, Ben McLemore, Kostas Antetokounmpo, and Devontae Kakuk. Yes, that's a lot of players, and like I said before, they are over the salary cap right now. So, in order to re-sign basically any of these guys, or the players I think they should re-sign, they're probably going to see themselves in the luxury tax. So, in terms of their own free agents, by all accounts, I think Dennis Schroeder is going to walk. The Lakers have said they basically just want to move on from him. He's asking for way too much money. I've heard reports saying he wants $100 million. They've offered him $80, which he's already declined. So, and they see him more as a sixth man than an actual starter. I assume Dennis Schroeder sees himself as a starter. So, in all likelihood, he'll probably be gone. If he's not gone, then they'll probably just sign and trade him to another team. Like I said before, Montrezl Harrell's 50-50 on picking up his $9 million player option. Now, if I were him, I'd pick it up because I don't think he's going to make $10 million on the open market, at least not for a contender, given what we saw in the 2020 playoffs and the 2021 playoffs and everything that's going on, but you never know. And then Alex Caruso, they have his bird rights, and reports are saying he's probably going to make somewhere between $8 to $12 million on the open market. I think they should re-sign him, and unless he makes an exorbitant amount of money, I assume they would re-sign him. Talen Horton-Tucker has his early bird rights, which means they can pay him $14 million, which I think that's enough to keep him. You could also, with Caruso and Talen Horton-Tucker, theoretically also move them in a sign trade, but especially for Caruso, what he gives you in terms of shooting and defense, I would rather want to keep him than trade him, unless you're getting like a superstar, but that's me. Wesley Matthews, I don't remember hearing a whole lot of like him wanting to resign, and if not, I assume you could probably get him for the minimum, or at least a mid-level. I don't think teams are going to be paying that much for him. Andre Drummond, by all reports, he says he wants to resign, and they can only give him $9 million. The most they can give him is the mid-level, which is right now $9 million for them. And the way Andre Drummond views himself, I would assume he's going to be asking for more money. And since the Lakers don't have his bird rights, they can't give it to him. So that should be interesting. I also don't think Andre Drummond really works for this team because, like I said before, you kind of want floor spacing and defense. And while Andre Drummond's improved as a defender, I still don't think he's a super plus defender. He's maybe like slightly above average, and he has also zero offensive game, so you kind of want someone who can play more off the ball and can provide a bit more floor spacing than Andre Drummond. Jared Dudley, he didn't really play that much. I assume he's probably either going to retire walk. Markieff Morris, you could probably sign him for the minimum. Same with Ben McLemore. And then Kostas Antetokounmpo and Devontae Kakuk are two-way players. I assume you either let them walk or re-sign them to two-way contracts. Actually, in terms of McLemore and Markieff, I feel like you should really hold on to Ben McLemore because I think he actually did prove a lot this season as a for the Lakers. I mean, he averaged just around 8 points a game. He shot 37% from behind the arc, which is just around league average. And for a team that really struggles with three-point shooting, if you can get a guy like that on a league minimum contract, I don't see why you wouldn't retain him. So that's it for the Lakers free agents. Yeah, there's a lot of them there, and I'd assume some of them or some combination is going to be gone when we look into next season. So now we look at the rumored players, and yes, with the Lakers, there are a lot of players being rumored. First player, Kyle Lowry. Now, Kyle Lowry actually makes a lot of sense for this team. This isn't even like a report saying, oh, this is just so stupid. Why would the Lakers obviously aren't going to get him? Kyle Lowry does make sense. Also, given the reports that might be happening with DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry's a perfect player that the Lakers could use, a point guard who can play with the ball in his hands, without the ball in his hands. He's a great defender, proven winner, excellent playmaker, great three-point shooter. I mean, every time I talk about, these how to rebuild these teams videos, Kyle Lowry's a player I'm always probably going to mention just because he fits seamlessly on almost every NBA team. There's also reports of CP3. Now, I truly think CP3 is probably going to re-sign with the Suns, and I think he should re-sign with the Suns, but, given his connection to LeBron and his past times in LA, you really never know. Also, CP3 also works out very well for the Lakers. Now, I think him and Kyle Lowry are both in the same vein where you don't know where exactly they are going to, when they're exactly going to fall off. But in terms of this year, both are great fits. I think Lowry's a bit more plausible than Chris Paul, but I could realistically see Chris Paul leaving, especially his connection with LeBron James. Next is Spencer Dinwiddie. Now, I guess Spencer Dinwiddie kind of is supposed to be what you thought Dennis Schroeder was supposed to be for your team. An off-the-bench guard who can create his own shot, can provide some, extra scoring when LeBron is sitting down and AD is sitting down. But the issue with Spencer Dinwiddie, two things with Spencer Dinwiddie. One, he tore his ACL, so you really don't know how he's going to bounce back from that. But also, the rumors I've heard of his asking price are very similar to Dennis Schroeder. I wholeheartedly believe Spencer Dinwiddie is a better player than Dennis Schroeder. He's a better passer. He's not as a liability defensively, and he's also a better three-point shooter. But I still think if you're not willing to pay Dennis Schroeder, let's say $100 million, would you be willing to pay Spencer Dinwiddie $100 million? I'm not entirely sure, but just want to throw that out there. Also, I've heard some Lonzo Ball rumors. There's no reason why for Lonzo Ball to come back. I think Lonzo Ball is a player who really, even though he was born in LA, he really doesn't fit the LA style, and I don't think he wants that media pressure on him. I think realistically he's going to go to a more of a team that missed the playoffs, and he wants to be more of the guy on another team. I don't think he wants to deal with the LA media circus again, but you never know. Next for shooting guards is DeMar DeRozan. Now, this is a theory I think that actually has some legs to it. I mean, DeMar DeRozan has always wanted to win a championship. Obviously, he hasn't. He's from Compton, I believe. I know he's from LA. Yeah, he's from Compton. So, went to USC. So, obviously, the connection's there. He's an elite scorer. He's really improved as a playmaker. The only knock on him is his three-point shooting. I mean, he hasn't shot over 35% ever in his NBA career. But I feel like he's still an elite scorer without it. Now, it'll be interesting to see how he fits next to AD and LeBron, given his lack of scoring. But I think it would be an interesting fit, and especially if you want to win a championship. There aren't many other teams who provide you a championship opportunity than the LA Lakers. Also, with the rumors I've been hearing of Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan wanting the team up again, the LA Lakers makes a perfect sense, at least in terms of logistics. I don't know how the money would work, but I think it'd be a cool idea to see DeMar DeRozan potentially win a championship because, he's really established himself as one of the more underrated players in the league. And to see a guy who is really faithful, really loyal to the Toronto Raptors his entire career, I would like to see him win a championship potentially, and I think the Lakers is a good idea for that. In terms of obviously not star guys who could just be more of like 3-and-D guys off the bench, or like 3-point specialists off the bench. Wayne Ellington, E'Twaun Moore, Tyler Johnson, Kent Bazemore. Make your selection. If you want a guy with a bit more shot creation, Alec Burks works, but you would have to use your mid-level on him, I'd assume, because he's going to make more than your vet minimum, while a lot of these other guys are probably going to make vet minimums. So now going to small forwards. Melo has been rumored. Obviously, the LeBron connection makes sense. Also, he's another player who's been dying to win an NBA championship, and he's never gotten one. I mean, he's really proven himself in the past couple of seasons as a bench scorer for the Portland Trailblazers, really reviving his career in a sense, and I think he would be a great bench alternative for the Lakers, and he would be very cheap, especially if he's willing to take a discount to go play for the Lakers. He averaged 13 and 15 points per game the last couple of seasons, doing so on, solid efficiency. I mean, shot 39% from behind the arc in 2020 and 41% from behind the arc in 2021. So, even at the age of 36, he was still balling. Obviously, there's the concern of how long he can keep this going, but even if he gives you, that production on similar efficiency, I think he should work fine as a bench option, and you can probably get him on a cheap contract because of his wanting to win a championship and his connection to LeBron. Also, other guys who could just serve as, vet minimums who can shoot the ball. Reggie Bullock, Torrey Craig, Solomon Hill. And then power forwards. Now, the way Lakers have used their power forwards, especially with Anthony Davis on their roster, they like to go with more small forwards who can play small ball 4, in a sense, or guys who can kind of be more versatile. If they want to play the 4, they can play the 4. If they can play the 3, they can play the 3. Or even hell, if you want to play them at the 5, they can play the 5. These platoon kind of a guys, you can just throw them in. They can shoot, play defense at a solid enough level, and you'll live with that. I mean, Jeff Green, I'd assume it'd be kind of hard for him to leave Brooklyn, but throw that out there. Patrick Patterson's probably the same way with the Clippers, but I think Patrick Patterson lost minutes in the rotation, so he'll probably be willing to leave. Nemanja Bjelica, he's not the defender that the other two guys are, but he can shoot. Lauri Markkanen's an interesting option because I don't think his market's that high, but his potential's higher than a lot of these other guys, and so if he can hit his shots like he did a couple of seasons ago, I think he'd be a solid option. Paul Millsap of the Denver Nuggets is more of the Patrick Patterson, Jeff Green kind of a role. Same with James Johnson. And then Trey Lyles. Now, in terms of centers, I don't know if they'll go after a center because I assume one of Montrez or Drummond will still be on the roster. I could be wrong, but I don't know if they're going to be fiending for a center, especially if they have zero money to work with. But I'll throw out the usual suspects I've really been naming these past couple of videos. Cody Zeller, Daniel Tice, Robin Lopez, Dwayne Dedmon, Gorgie Dang, JaVale McGee. They can all play defense at a solid enough level. They're solid rebounders. They're not going to kill you all the time, but they're not going to be anything special. A couple of the guys can be 3-point shooters, so there's that. They'll probably play 15 to 20 minutes in the playoffs, and they won't kill you, and they'll be serviceable. So, what is the best, worst, and realistic case scenario for the Lakers this offseason? Well, let's start with the worst case scenario because honestly I think it's pretty unrealistic just given prior LeBron teams and how they've managed off seasons, especially after losing a championship. And also, I just think the Lakers' willingness to spend money and obviously go all in for this championship window. Worst case scenario, you don't really trade anyone. You kind of stick with the same roster. Maybe you swap Dennis Schroeder for Spencer Dinwiddie, and you essentially run it back. Now, I will say, unlike most teams I'm going to do for this series, or most teams I've done so far, worst case scenario for the Lakers is still a very good team. I mean, presuming everyone is healthy and nothing goes wrong, they're probably at least a Western Conference Finals team, maybe even an NBA Finals team. I mean, if you look at how well they were doing before everyone got hurt, they were a good team. And you can make an argument that they don't even need to be fixing. They just need to get help. So, worst case scenario, you kind of bring back all your guys. Maybe you swap out a couple of role players, but essentially the same. The core is essentially the same. You don't add a star or anyone through trades or free agency. So that's the worst case scenario. Just kind of same roster. Best case scenario, I think there's two ways you can go with best case scenario. I think A, you somehow land Damian Lillard, which I don't think is realistic, which isn't super realistic, but if you want to go something a bit more realistic, you can get the package of Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, which at least on paper should be a very good roster. And then maybe in the draft you get a guy like, you luck into Kispert, or you take someone like McBride or Bones Highland, someone who can just complement this team and fill in the gaps for some players who may be leaving. I don't think the Damian Lillard scenario is realistic, just because I don't think the Lakers have a lot to offer, because their current assets, like the young players like KCP's not that young, but like Kyle Kuzma, the 22nd overall pick, it's not really that enticing. And they don't have a lot of future first-round picks to offer because they gave them up in the Anthony Davis trade. But I think the Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan situation is pretty realistic. I think DeMar DeRozan especially, just because of his connections to LA and his willingness or wanting to win an NBA championship, and Kyle Lowry could potentially tag along. Now, what's something more realistic? I think realistically the Lakers can get Buddy Hield. I mean, they've really been in desperate need of a three-point shooter. Even their championship team didn't have a whole lot of three-point shooting. It kind of makes sense for both parties. You know, the Kings can bring in someone like Kyle Kuzma, who potentially could raise his value up. They get another trade chip in KCP, who they could flip to a contender. And then Buddy Hield obviously provides good shooting for the Lakers. And then in free agency, maybe you get DeMar DeRozan. I just feel like DeMar DeRozan just makes so much sense for the LA Lakers, at least in terms of like the other stuff. Maybe the fit isn't 100% perfect, but I don't see why he wouldn't want to come to the Lakers, just given where he is in his stage of his career and his prior connection to LA. I also think Melo's pretty realistic. I just think also his connection to LeBron James, his willingness to want to win. Also, he's been willing to take on a lesser role, and I'm sure the Lakers would gladly have him as like a 6th or 7th man off the bench. And then maybe you can get back Andre Drummond on a cheap deal. I'm not a huge fan of him, but I assume they probably would want to bring him back, especially if he's willing to come back. So, you know, really in any of these scenarios, maybe not the worst case scenario, but I feel like the Lakers will go into next season better, barring any injuries. I mean, they were the 1 seed before, and it's just a matter of how healthy LeBron and AD can be throughout this entire season, which AD throughout his entire career has really been subject to injuries, and LeBron, 2 of his last 3 seasons in LA, he's dealt with injuries himself. Now, granted, the 1 year he wasn't hurt, they won a championship. So, you know, I think in really any of these scenarios, Lakers at minimum should be a second-round team. I think they're pretty much a lock for the Western Conference Finals, barring any injuries. And, you know, I don't know how they face up against the Brooklyn Nets, if they even make it, or even the Milwaukee Bucks, who are the reigning champs. But, you know, I don't think things will be as grim in the City of Angels, barring any injuries. So, that'll do it for this video. This is the final part of my How to Fix series before the draft. Don't worry, I still got a couple more teams I want to do for free agency and trade rumors. And so we're going to keep this going, you know, for the next couple of weeks once we get into free agency. And it's going to be a very interesting offseason period. And I'm excited. There's going to be a lot of changes. And I'm just excited to talk basketball. So if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell, and I'm out. Peace.